So let's talk World War III, or the beginnings thereof, maybe. I'm coming in this morning and I'm just listening to the news, and I'm thinking about where we are. I mean, it's like a flashback to like the World War II movies that I grew up with. I mean, you see bombarding of cities in Ukraine, and it's Vladimir Putin has lost his mind. Some people think that. I mean, for this day and age, 2022, to invade a democratic country without real pretense, just because he wants to reunify them with the Soviet Union and maybe put together the Soviet Union again, this is pretty interesting stuff. It's scary stuff, too. I got to tell you, this week I've been really fearful of the future of the world. We've lived through COVID, the pandemic. That was scary for many of us, obviously all of us in some way. And as soon as COVID gets off the screen and people stop talking about it, now we have a war in Europe. And watching the videos, I mean, the one thing now about our war going on now versus the war in the 1930s and 40s is that we have instant communication. I mean, everybody has their cell phone, and we have news organizations there reporting everything live, so you see it in real time. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, I was watching yesterday when you saw this this Russian jet fighter, shoot a missile into the side of a residential high-rise, blowing up the corner of the building. Hopefully those people were not home at the time, but you have a situation now where Putin and Russia are actually attacking the civilization, the civilians in Ukraine. They're not just going after military issues. They're going after the infrastructure of the people. And regardless of how the world is reacting, and the world pretty much is pretty unified in its horror about what's going on. And maybe that's what's going to really end this, is the world coming together and isolating Russia and Putin. And the key here is going to be China. Well, what's China going to do here? But the world is horrified for what we're watching. And they don't seem to want to back down. There's talks about maybe, Putin wants to have a delegation meet with the Ukrainians and discuss some negotiation. Well, the only negotiation Putin wants is a total surrender of Ukraine to the Russians. Now, one thing that is amazing to the world is how hard the Ukrainians are fighting to keep their freedom and to protect their country. Now, granted, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union for a long time. But Ukraine was invaded by the Russians during World War II. They were a fiercely independent country. And they wanted to maintain their independence. They've been a democratic country now for almost 25 years. And once people taste freedom, they don't want to go back to totalitarianism, to dictatorship, to communism. And they're going to fight to the end. And they've been pretty successful. They're not going to win this war, but they're going to go down fighting. And I think that Putin's miscalculated. I think when he is successful and they finally surrender, there's going to be guerrilla warfare. There's going to be sabotage. Russia's going to pay a heavy price for this. And they're paying a heavy price now. We don't really know the casualty figures. But the Ukrainians are saying they've killed over 3,600 Russians, which is significant in a number of ways. A, just showing the capability of the Ukrainians to defend their country. But, Russians aren't really happy about this. And we're seeing demonstrations in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. Over 3,000 people have been arrested for protesting. And this is really where Putin has his problem. And this is his Achilles heel. If he has problems at home, he may be deposed because of this. He may have made the worst miscalculation a politician has ever made. And time will tell. But, Russians look at Ukrainians as their family. I mean, they were unified for so long as part of the Soviet Union. Many people have relatives in the Ukraine, many Russians. And they're seeing their families being attacked by their own government. And this may be the undoing of Putin. But Putin seems hell-bent on doing this. He's hell-bent, and the question now that the world has is he satisfied with just Ukraine, or is he going to rebuild the Soviet Union? He said he wanted to in the past. Does he go after Poland next? Or the Latvia and the Baltics? Which then is World War III. The United States is not defending Ukraine. Maybe we're supplying them with weapons and all. They're not a part of NATO. And that's what the gist about this is Ukraine wants to be part of NATO. And to Russia, I understand the concern that Putin has. Think about it. What if you had Oregon, Washington State, and California secede from the United States, and then all of a sudden the Russians moved in and made them puppet states, or even part of their own alliance? How would we feel in the United States? And what if they put missiles in there and everything else? We wouldn't be happy. And this is exactly what's happening to Russia right now. They're surrounded. The Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, those are right on the border of Russia. And Ukraine as well. So if we move in there, I mean, I can understand a guy like Putin, who witnessed the Soviet Union's fall back in the 90s. He was the head of the KGB. I could understand their concern. Now, would I go to world war over it? Probably not. But the world is unified pretty much against this. Now, what is the West doing so far? Finally, they decided to arm Ukraine. It may be a little too late, as the Russians are knocking on the door of Kiev, or Kyiv. When did Kiev become Kyiv? I've always known it as Kiev, but now it's Kyiv. They're on a doorstep. The Ukrainians are putting up the good fight. We'll see how long they could hold out, but they're not gonna win this. They're just going to make the Russians pay a heavy price. And let me tell you, when Russian families are seeing their children coming home in body bags, that's not good for Putin. So you got people all around the world who are protesting, including in Russia itself. Putin may have a bigger time in keeping peace in Russia than taking over Ukraine. Now, it was announced yesterday that European nations, along with the United States, announced that they're going to take Russia out of the SWIFT banking system. And at least select the top 10 Russian banks are going to be removed from the SWIFT system. And they say this will ensure that the banks are disconnected from the international financial system and harm their ability to operate globally. The West is committed to imposing restrictive measures that will prevent the Russian central bank from deploying its international reserves in ways that undermine the impact of our sanctions. What is the SWIFT banking system? And I know what it was. I know it's an international wire kind of thing that goes on, but I never really looked into it. SWIFT stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. It's a member-owned cooperative that provides safe and secure financial transactions for its members. It was established in 1973. SWIFT uses a standardized proprietary communications platform to facilitate the transmission of information about financial transactions. So it's a messaging system is really what it is, where banks are able to talk with each other worldwide and settle financial transactions. SWIFT doesn't hold funds. It doesn't manage any money. It just allows these communications to go by. There's more than 200 countries involved, and it links more than 11,000 financial institutions. So this is the way international commerce is done. through this banking system. Now, is this going to destroy Russia's financial system? Probably not. Probably not. But it certainly will damage them in some way. I'm sure they've prepared for this. They have backup systems that they're going to use. They'll go through China and so forth. But it's a combination of things that will take them down. Now, the one thing that would absolutely severely affect Russia and its economy and its ability to fight a protracted war is oil. And this is the one sanction that we haven't put on Russia. They make $700 million a day from the sale of oil and natural gas, mainly to Europe. But the Europeans and the Americans don't want to put sanctions on that because of the price of oil already and because of inflation. I mean, if we put sanctions on Russia's ability to sell oil to Europe, and by the way, the United States, we buy their oil as well, since we're no longer energy independent, which we'll talk as we go along here. If we do this, if we shut them off, the prices of energy in Europe are going to skyrocket, harming our European allies, as well as us. Even if we get very little oil from Russia, the bottom line is that if oil the flow of oil is tightened up around the world, it's going to flow into our markets as well. And briefly, this week, Thursday, when the invasion began, oil prices jumped to $105 a barrel before easing up later in the day, and I think it closed at $93 a barrel on Friday. I was driving in today, the highest I've seen gasoline in many, many years, $3.73 for regular on the Parkway. And $4 gasoline is right around the corner. So let's talk about the financial ramifications of that. What's going on? Now, Thursday morning, when I got up and the invasion began, and this was no surprise, we all knew it was going to happen. The Dow Jones Industrial Futures were down 800 points. Oil was over $100 a barrel. Gold was up almost $70 an ounce. Natural gas prices in Europe jumped 60%. 60% in one day. Staggering. The average in Europe was 42% increase. Can you imagine that energy? If they were already elevated. And if you want to look at the equivalent oil price to get the price that they're paying for natural gas, you're looking at $175 to $220 barrel oil to equal what they're paying for natural gas in Europe. So Europe is between a rock and a hard place. The only way to really hurt Putin and Russia is to hurt their flow of oil, because that's their lifeblood, that's their economy. That's the money that Putin gets for his military complex. So the only way you could hurt Putin and Russia is to hurt ourselves at the same time. Oh, by the way, if you want to talk about timing, you couldn't get, it's almost like this is purposeful. Here's the headline. Biden administration freezes new oil and gas drilling leases despite recent court-ordered injunction. Forget the court-ordered injunction. Why would you freeze new oil and gas drilling in the United States at a time when you have $100 oil, high gas prices? Meanwhile, we're not shutting down the oil for Russia. We're only shutting down the oil for the United States. It's almost like Biden. Ooh, remember Trump was an agent of Russia. Almost like Biden is an agent of Russia. What is the first thing, the absolute first thing Biden did on Inauguration Day? Shut down the Keystone Pipeline. Shortly thereafter, stopped oil leases and gas leases in the United States. Crippled the U.S. energy industry. First day. Meanwhile, we've been encouraging the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which will bring energy to Europe. We haven't done anything to stop Russian gas production, Russian oil production, Russian oil sales. We're just destroying our own energy industry. I mean, this is just counterintuitive. Donald Trump talked last night to the CPAC Conservative Convention. We'll play some of that later in the show. But he basically said we were energy independent, which we were. We were exporting oil for the first time. And within a year, less than that, Biden and his administration have nuked the energy industry here in the United States. You want to talk about anti-American? But we're still letting Russia sell their oil because Biden's afraid that politically, with inflation the way it is right now, that he can't let it get worse. So this week we had volatility of financial markets. I saw this week on Thursday and Friday intervention and manipulation and rigging of financial markets like I haven't seen in a long, long time. So Thursday morning, war breaks out in Europe, potential for World War III breaking out, energy prices skyrocketing, bond yields dropping for the first time in a long time. Why would that happen? A flight to safety. People are selling risk assets and putting them somewhere where they know it's safe, bidding up bond prices in the U.S. Treasury market, lowering yields. So the yield on a 10-year Treasury dropped to, I think it was 1.84. It was close to 2 the day before. Gold was up, I said almost $70. Silver was up $1.15. And why? Because people buy gold and silver during times of uncertainty and turmoil. That's the place people go. They go to Treasury bonds for safety, and they go to gold and silver for safety. Cryptocurrencies were plunging, which just goes to tell you that they're not gold and silver. They're risk assets. And the stock market was crashing. So the market opens up down 800 points. Gold's up $1,970 an ounce, almost at $2,000 an ounce. Should be $3,000, but if it wasn't for the rigging of the gold market, which we're going to talk about in a second. And oil prices were soaring. And then later in the day, as usually happens, around 2 o'clock, Biden comes out and does a speech, a press conference, if you want to call it that. He didn't even take questions. And the markets start reversing. Gold goes down. Not only does it give up its $70 price appreciation, it goes negative $20. Silver, that was up $1.20, down 30 cents. The stock market, down 800 points earlier, closes up for the day. Oil prices drop down to $93 a barrel from $105. Now, did Putin come out and say he's stopping the war? No. Did bombs stop raining down on Ukraine? No. So why did markets reverse? Because of something we call in the business the plunge protection team. What is the plunge protection team, you ask? Well, after the crash in 1987, President Ronald Reagan put together a group which was comprised of the big Wall Street banks, the Federal Reserve, and the U.S. Treasury. And they entitled that the Working Group on Financial Markets. Now, on Wall Street, we always called it the plunge protection team. Like, their job is to prevent crashes. And I guess that's a good thing. Nobody likes crashes in financial markets. But now it's used to just rescue the market anytime it's going down. And that's exactly what happened on the afternoon of Thursday. Is that the markets were rescued by the plunge protection team. People I know that follow markets were just blown away by the reversal. And it always happens late in the afternoon because they don't want you to turn on the TV and listen to the nightly news and find out that the market was down 1,000 points. Because that'll encourage more selling and panic the next day. So late in the day, they start buying futures. They have ways of doing it through the big banks on Wall Street. The Federal Reserve goes in there and says, buy up the market through the futures market, and that kicks in computer programs and algorithms that you have to buy. Those who shorted the market, betting against it, have to cover because they're losing money. And at the end of the day, everything is fine. And actually, for the week, the markets were fractionally higher. Not a lot, less than 1%. But you would think in a week that World War III breaks out, the markets would have a pretty tough week. No, they didn't. They really didn't. The clown show that is the Biden administration and Peppermint Patty, she comes out and she says things that you just want to scratch your head. Now, she came out earlier in the week and she said that the whole idea of sanctions is to prevent Putin from going into Ukraine. Now, Biden comes out a day or two later after they started and basically says the following.
No one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. This is going to take time, and we have to show resolve so he knows what's coming. And so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them. That's what this is all about.
So he says, no. Meanwhile, Peppermint Patty said that the whole idea of sanctions is preventing. She said it like the day or two before. And he comes out and says that. Now, she had to defend what she had to say. She said, well, he didn't really mean that the next day. He just said it. It's pretty amazing. He came out and said nobody expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. And she comes out and said, no, he didn't say that. That's not what he meant. He didn't really mean it. We always got to cover for Joey. Make sure that the world knows really what he meant, not what he said. So where does this all go? I mean, nobody knows. You got one man, Vladimir Putin, who's calling all the shots. The world is watching pretty impotently, I would say. You have the Ukrainians fighting for their life. And I tell you, I'm impressed with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. I mean, that guy's got guts. He was offered by the United States to be pulled out of there yesterday. He said, I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. I'm staying here. I'm fighting. And you see average Ukrainians, taking arms and fighting. And that tells you something. These people are proud. These people are free. You got to realize there's a whole generation of people in Europe, Eastern Europe, that don't know communism, that only know freedom. They didn't live under the Soviet Union. And they're going to give everything they can to fight. Now, a recent Associated Press poll said that 26% of Americans believe that countries should be playing a major role in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So most Americans don't want us to be involved at all in this. Most Americans don't even know where Ukraine is. Most Americans don't know the history of Ukraine and Russia, and even World War II for the most part, unless you're an older person. A small majority, 52%, said the U.S. should take a minor role in the unfolding war. And 20% don't want America involved in any way. Meanwhile, a Gallup poll found that only 36% of Americans think Joe Biden is doing a good job on the situation with Russia. And 55% disapprove of his performance. 64% of Democrats approve of the way Biden's handling this. Only 35% of independent voters. So, you know, Democratic voters, they'll go down with this shit. They don't care. Only 11% of Republicans offered the same support. So Americans really don't want to be involved in this. Unfortunately, there's no choice. Americans are going to be involved in it. We're leaders of the free world, leaders of NATO. And the question now is, what happens next? All right, so for the week, let's go over the markets. The Dow closed at 34,058, down 0.06%. It was like nothing happened last week. The markets didn't change at all. And this is probably the fourth week in a row where you look at the market, how the market ended the week, like very little change. But if you live it every day like I do and watch the ups and downs and the craziness that's going on, boy, it seems like it was a lot worse. So on Thursday, we had a reversal from down 800 points in the Dow to up, I think it was 90-something. So a 900-point reversal. Friday, before the markets opened, it was announced that Putin wants to have discussions with Ukraine, whatever that means. Terms of surrender is the way I looked at it. Some say, well, all Russia wants, all Putin wants is the Ukrainians to say they're not going to join NATO. He wants more than that. But the markets loved it. Oh boy, Putin wants to talk. The Dow closed up 835 points on Friday, up 2.5% after a 900-point reversal on Thursday. So in 2 days, we had almost a 2,000-point rally as bombs are dropping all over Ukraine. For the year, the Dow is still down 6.27%. The S&P 500 for the week, up 0.8%. Nothing happened interesting last week. Down 8% for the year. The NASDAQ was up 1.08% for the week, but still down 12.5% for the year. So the PPT, the plunge protection team, went to work this week. Rallied the stock market in the face of what was looking like a major crash. Destroyed the gold market by selling futures contracts. God knows how many ounces of paper gold they sold to get it down. I mean, to get a revert, when you have war breaking out and people around the world are buying gold, and then it opens in New York, all the big declines happen in the COMEX. And people who follow gold call it the CRIMEX, because this is where all the manipulation is done. And it's done on behalf of central banks because central banks don't want gold going up. It shows loss of confidence in the currencies of Western nations. It illustrates the problems of inflation or financial upheaval. And they sold it. They don't sell gold. They sell futures contracts. That's not gold. No gold changes hands. You could sell $1 billion worth of gold and never deliver it to anybody. You just sell paper contracts in the futures market, pushing the price down. And when the price goes all the way down, you buy it back and you make a nice profit. These Wall Street banks have been doing this for 25 years. I've been following the gold market. Bitcoin had a rough week. It started the week over 40,000, closed I think 38,000 and change. One of the worst performing assets is Bitcoin, if not the worst performing asset in the world. One of the best in 2021. So how are markets doing year to date? Well, commodities are up 25%. That's why you see inflation. Energy prices especially. Food prices. Lumber prices. It costs now $18,000 more to build a new home than it did only 6 months ago. Other commodities, so oil's up 25%. Other commodities up 21.3%. Gold is up 4% year to date. Cash in the bank and money markets returned zero, which is certainly better than the other assets. Government bonds are down 3.2%. Corporate bonds are down over 4%, almost 4.5%. Stocks on average are down 8.5%, and Bitcoin, the worst performer of them all, down 17.3%. So we have rocky markets, although they're manipulated very, very much. We'll see how long that holds up. We got a declining geopolitical situation. The question now is, what's China do? I mean, China is poised to go into Taiwan. There wouldn't be a better time to do it than when Biden's president and Russia's going into Europe. We'll see what happens there. But we're living in very dangerous times. Oh, by the way, do you notice that nobody's talking about COVID anymore? It just dropped off the face of the earth. Nobody cares about COVID anymore. They're talking about getting rid of masks. This week coming up, thankfully, our kids in school don't have to wear masks. Vaccination rates have plummeted to almost nothing. We'll talk about that later in the program. COVID craziness goes on, don't get me wrong. But now we've moved on to better things. They didn't kill us with a pandemic, so now maybe nuclear war. And one of the most concerning things this week was Putin coming out and saying anybody who tries to help the Ukrainians, I'm paraphrasing now, he said basically the repercussions will be worse than the world has ever seen. Well, that's not too veiled threat of nuclear war. So he's threatening the West with nuclear war if anybody comes and helps Ukraine. Now, how does Putin get out of this in any way, shape, or form? He's either going to get out of it by being totally deposed. And I tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if I wake up one morning and find out Putin's dead. That would be a great development if it could happen. But there's got to be elements in the Russian military, especially on a higher up level, that don't believe this is a good thing, who may have relatives in Ukraine, who may have relatives who are dying on the battlefields of Ukraine. They see the political instability in Russia as these protests come on. So Putin may lose his own country, and that would be his demise. Or they come to some kind of negotiation where Ukraine, I think this is the best outcome, the best outcome is Putin taking a bullet to the head. But the second best outcome would be just Ukraine saying, look, we're not going to join NATO. And the least that the Russians want is to depose the current government in Ukraine and put a puppet government in, like they have in Belarus. But the worst case scenario is one I don't really want to think about, which you take Ukraine, and then you look at Poland and Romania and the Baltics and so forth. Very, very risky times, very fearful times that we live in, very historic times. And unfortunately, the West does not have the leadership necessary to deal with this. Let's take a break. The phone number here is 732-237-9626, 732-237-9626. My name's Lou Scatigna. You're listening to The Financial Physician right here on 92.7 WOBM. Don't go away.